Last episode we built this island city for our entertainment district, but now it's finally time to move on to the next project, which is happening right across from our starter base. My plan is to completely transform this part of the island and eventually build a massive castle on top of it. But for today, I want to focus on terraforming, and I'm doing this for a few reasons. One, a smaller project allows me to work ahead on my next video, reducing some personal stress and time constraints. And two, and more importantly, a lot of you have asked about my creative process and how I approach building in Minecraft, so I figured this hardcore episode could double as a showcase of how I build in survival mode. Now, I would like to clarify and say that one more time, this is not a quote-unquote how to build in Minecraft tutorial, this is a showcase of my personal building process. But let's begin with part one, which is planning. A quote my mom always used to say to me was, "Failing to plan is planning to fail," and my building process follows that philosophy. First, we need to figure out what we're building. Today, I want to create a massive cliffside rock formation, but your build will probably be very different. So spend some time deciding what you want to create, and just as importantly, where you want to place it. Location is everything. A great build can really look awful if it's in the wrong spot. Now, I always try to make my functional builds look good. So for example, my creeper farm, it's an XP farm, and it works very well, but it's also visually striking. It stands out against the blue ocean and creates a unique focal point on the island. This is also the stage where you should consider any lore for your world. My creeper farm, again, for instance, has a backstory. It's a prison where villagers from my starter island banished all the creepers. The holes all over it, well, they're from years of failed escape attempts. And while I'm brainstorming the lore, this is where I normally also like to gather inspiration. My go-to place for inspiration is Pinterest, not just for Minecraft builds, but also for general concept art that can help shape ideas. Once you have a vision, the next step is scale. Before you even open the game, literally just ask yourself this simple question: is this a small, medium, or large project? It doesn't have to be exact, but knowing the general size is crucial. If your scale is off, the whole project can feel unbalanced. And I know it sounds really simple and stupid for me to just be like, oh, sit there and think. But this is something that I see a lot of people often overlook, so I figured it was worth mentioning. But anyways, now that we have a plan, the what, where, and why, we're ready to start. In my case, I'll be building a large cliffside formation at the base of my island, meant to support the mega castle that will eventually connect to my starter base. So now we're on to part 2 of building in hardcore Minecraft, which is going into creative mode. But seriously, okay, at this point, there are 2 ways you might approach building. The first way is hardcore, the old school way. No outside tools, no assistance, just straight freehand building. And that's great. In fact, most players without access to a PC will probably build this way, but that's not how I go about it. I use Lightmatica, which is a blueprint mod that lets you design a build in creative mode and then transfer a ghost structure into survival to follow along. You still have to do all the heavy lifting yourself, like gathering materials and placing every block. It just helps with visualization. Now, I don't use Lightmatica all the time. In fact, if I wasn't a YouTuber, I probably wouldn't use it at all. I grew up freehand building, and there's something nostalgic about that playstyle that I absolutely love. It's OG Minecraft. So if a project is small enough, I'll still build entirely from scratch, even though it will take me much longer. But at this point in my YouTube journey, my top priority isn't just playing the way I want anymore. It's making sure you guys get high quality videos with interesting builds as fast as possible. This is my job now. I have to consider how long each build takes because, well, I like to be able to eat and pay my bills. Lightmatica saves time, helps me create better looking structures, and gets content out to you much faster. But now that we've established the tools and process I use to prepare, let's actually start building. The first thing I do is create a backup version of my main hardcore world. I'll then go into this spare copy of the world and change the game mode from survival to creative. This will enable me to make builds look more realistic because I'm working with the actual terrain that's in my hardcore world and not just practicing on a super flat world where I don't have to adapt to the direct environment around me. And so for today's build, I'm going to be starting with the use of another mod called Axiom. Axiom is without a doubt the most advanced terrain editing mod out there, and it has definitely come in clutch for me more than a few times. And I'm going to start by using Axiom's slope tool, and by selecting 2 points on the map and then dragging my mouse across the screen, Axiom will give me a perfectly sloped piece of land connecting those 2 points. And I can use this technique to build up the base of the cliffside. So now that we have the general shape of the cliffside, I want to start doing a little bit more of the fine details on the rock work. And for this, I'm going to be using World Edit. I'm going to take a shovel from my inventory and apply a sand sphere brush to the shovel. And then I'm going to mask it to air to make sure the only blocks I can manipulate are air blocks and I won't interfere with the rest of the terrain. I'm then just going to go through and use different variations and different sizes of this brush to paint on some more spherical sand structures to help me get the look of natural spawning rocks. And the reason why I've decided to use sand for this is because, as you can see as I paint along here, wherever there are air blocks, the sand will fall down instead of just remaining stationary. So instead of actual spheres, because the sand is falling, we get these natural looking rock formations. But now that we have that, we're going to go back into Axiom and we're going to use Axiom's Terrain Smooth tool. And I'm just going to paint over this to the best of my abilities to make the terrain look like it flows better. With the smoothing out of the way, I am now going to take the paint tool, mask it to the surface of the ground, and start painting over the entire mountain structure in red wool. I'm doing this for 2 primary reasons. 1, this is going to help us easily select the area so that we can apply block gradients. And 2, it's going to help us create kind of a shell of the build so we can get rid of all the other blocks that are on the interior. That way, when we transfer this thing over to Lightmatica, we won't get an inaccurate block list because there's a bunch of underground unseen blocks that are taking up space. But after running a few replace blocks with air commands, it's time to paint on that gradient that I was talking about. Now, there are a few ways you can do gradient painting. The first of which is through auto shading, and this is much easier and much less time consuming, and to be honest with you, it looks a lot cooler. With auto shading, you can use your character's position as a reference to where light is coming from, as if your character were the sun. And then, based on the block palette that you select or an automatic preset that's available through Axiom, all you have to do is click the auto shade button and it'll paint the gradient on, moving from light blocks closest to the player to darker blocks furthest away from the player and in other places where shadows would be. And it's absolutely stunning as this looks. At this point, I have to keep in mind that I am in hardcore, and there's a lot of different blocks in this gradient that Axiom has selected for me, one of which is bedrock. Now, it would be easy for me to just replace bedrock with something else, but I also don't want to have to go out and collect 50 different types of blocks. So instead, I'm just going to reset the auto shade tool and I'm going to move over to Axiom's gradient painter, and I'm going to start painting on the exact same gradient we used on the rocks under the starter base. This way there will be consistency between the 2 builds, and even though it may not look as good, I think it's more important that this build fits the theme of our world than it does actually look a little bit cooler. But I'm just going to go along the coast here, continuously selecting 2 different points to go from the bottom to the top, moving from stone to mossy cobblestone, and then to moss on the top of the hill. I'm trying to get the look of rocks on the side of the build, but I do want the top of this mountain to be completely covered in grass. So now we'll just move to the back here, and I'm going to use a gradient of just regular grass blocks and moss blocks. This way we can have the grass fading into moss as it goes up the top of the mountain. And I actually think this is turning out really good. I'm starting to get excited. This is looking pretty sick. Now it's time to do some work on the shadows. So I'm going to come in with a sphere paintbrush. I'm going to set the radius to 0 and mask the surface. And then in some spots where I can see natural shadows forming from Minecraft's shading system, I'm just going to place in some cobbled deep slate to show the really dark shadows. And then surrounding the cobbled deep slate, in order to get us a better transition from the dark color to the light color, I'm going to throw some tuff in as well. I'm also just going to be using the tuff as a standalone block in some other parts of this build to give us some shadows that are perhaps less intense than the main dark ones. And there we go. Although it's not perfect, it definitely looks a lot better than it did before. Now we're just going to go in with Lightmatica, make a selection, and save the schematic as cliffside. Now we have this entire mountain area saved as a preset, and we can bring it over into hardcore. Now that we've switched over to our actual survival world, it's time to start gathering the materials and begin building. Now the first thing I'm going to need is a bunch of bone meal from our new bone meal farm in the entertainment district. Even though we didn't build this version of the cliffside in our testing world, I do want it to be covered in grass and perhaps some leaf blocks as well to just make it look bushier and more natural. And the best thing about this bone meal farm is not only is this a bone meal farm, but it can also act as a moss farm. So I'm literally just going to stand inside the thing for a couple of hours and collect the second block we need, which is a bunch of moss blocks. Now, a lot of the other blocks that we need, fortunately, I'm pretty sure we already have all of them. The first of which is stone, which we have a ton of that left over from all the mining sessions that we've done. We'll also need a bunch of grass blocks, which is the one material I'm kind of worried about. I don't know how much of this we actually have, but well, actually, from the looks of it, I think we might be good on this too. I didn't realize how much grass we actually had, but I forgot we had to clear out a massive area for the entertainment district, so I think we're good on grass as well. Then I'm going to also need some deep slates, although not nearly as much as the rest of the blocks. I'm going to take some andesite with me just in case as well, just in case we want to maybe change up the color palette a little bit. Of course, we are also going to need to use the last of the tough blocks that we have. And then hopefully we should have plenty of cobblestone left over from, again, all those previous mining sessions that we've done. So we'll just grab as much of this as we can find and hope that we have enough. And finally, we have to take some of our moss and some of our cobblestone to get that mossy cobblestone I was talking about. But now that we have all the resources collected, we can load up the schematic for the build and bring it into the world. Now we just gotta position it in the right place. My game is going to freeze as I do this because it's moving so many phantom blocks. Oh my god. Alright, there we go. Everything is lined up, and now it is time to start building. And I think what I want to do is fix up actually like the left side and the left portion of the build here first, because this is where the terrain kind of melts into the old terrain that we already have built. So I'm probably going to want to fix up this area first and make sure everything flows properly before we move on to the rest of the build. But now that we're done with the left side of the build, we're going to move on to the front and the main portion of the structure. And while we build this, I wanted to go over today's comment of the day, which comes from Carrie Vors. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But they commented under a post I made about my chest monster, saying storage systems are for noobs, half my world's hours are looking for like random feathers or something. So Carrie, thank you for the comments, and I'm addressing this one because I absolutely could not agree more. I have a very big storage and organization problem in my world, and although it's getting better, I have specific places for specific items. Like my farm is where I'm going to be storing all of my food, my mining district is where I'm going to be storing all my stone light blocks. I still think I need a dedicated storage room, and I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, but I know that I want it to be a very big build because I want one of those like ultimate storage rooms, you know what I'm saying? Like the ones where it will automatically sort like almost every item in the game, and you can input a code using buttons to get out specific amounts of specific items. I want that kind of storage room. Now, I have no idea how I'm going to start it or what that build is going to be, but it's moving more towards the top of my to-do list. So Carrie, again, thank you for the comments, and we'll see what happens as time goes on. And before we get back to the regular video, I'd also like to quickly give a shout out to all my Patreon and channel members. If I've said it once before, then I've said it 100 times. You guys are essential in keeping the channel running when I'm not uploading as frequently. So thank you all so much for keeping the content machine going. I really appreciate your support, and it does not go unnoticed. But alright, the front rock face of the cliff is done, and I have to say, this feels a lot bigger in survival than it does creative. And I think that's kind of just a perspective thing. You know, when we're in creative mode, we're constantly looking at the thing from above, we're flying around, but in survival, we're at the ground level most of the time, and we get a better sense of scale for the actual size of this project. And this thing is huge. And the good news is it also looks just as good from the front as it did in creative mode. So I'm happy about that. But now it's time to put away most of the stone blocks that we have, and we're going to primarily get out all of our grass and moss blocks. And that's because it's finally time to work on the back and get it connected to the rest of the terrain. There we go, everything is connected down and it feels, again, really cool in survival. Much cooler in survival than it did in creative. I was kind of worried when I was testing this out in creative mode, but I think this is working out very well and I'm happy with it. So now what I want to do is take some of that bone meal we collected earlier in the episode, and I'm going to go around and just spam some bone meal in some random places, and I'm going to be punching out any of the like azalea bushes we get or any flowers we get. That way we just have regular grass and tall grass. So the mountain will look a bit bushier, but still kind of feel like a plains biome. Not too much color going on here, just some regular grass blocks. But all right, now that that's done, we can start moving on to... Okay, sorry, we're back. It's on site for those guys. But with the grass in place, we can now start moving around all of the torches I placed down earlier. And I want to just basically replace these and move them from the surface and put them under some moss carpets. That way this area will still be lit up, but we don't have to have the ugly brown of the torches kind of ruining the aesthetic of the hill. Now, with all the torches hidden and out of the way, there is another block that I want to include on this hill here, which is oak leaves. So we're going to fly across the river here to a nearby oak forest, and I'm just going to use my shears to scoop some of those up, and then we're just going to head back to the mountain here and place them sporadically. I don't want this place to feel too overwhelmed with foliage, so we're just going to be placing them every once in a while to add some more texture and detail. I gotta tell you, I am ready to start upgrading to the newer versions of Minecraft. The only reason why I haven't is because not all of my mods are compatible yet, but seeing all the new foliage blocks that are coming into the game, I really... the time is coming, man. But there we go. I think this place definitely looks better with all that grass and foliage on top of it. And so we are almost done with this project. The last thing I want to do today is the most dangerous part of this episode, which is going underneath the structure we built, which, by the way, it looks absolutely insane under here. But I would really like to light up this entire area with some more torches. That way we won't have mobs spawning under here, and in the off chance that we fall through, we should be pretty safe. I'd also like to say, there's so much space under here, we could definitely add some kind of farms or structures under here. We're definitely going to utilize this in one way or another, because it would be just a huge wasted opportunity if we didn't build something under here. Maybe we could even have like the catacombs or prison area of the mega castle that's eventually going to go here be located under this mountain cliffside. I don't know, but we'll figure that out as time goes along. But with everything lit up, I think that is going to do it for today's episode. I know hardcore survival content wise, this one was pretty quick, and I do apologize for that, but I hope you guys also enjoyed the kind of building tutorial, or at least a showcase of my building process that was in the beginning of this video. But that is going to do it for today, so thank you all again so much for watching, and I gotta get going because I want to get started on that mega castle.